Okay, we are live. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am joined today by very special guest, Mr. Matthew Karas, who is the founder of Babelbit, subnet number 59 on the Bittensor network. Matthew, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking about everything to do with AI translation, and you've got a wealth of experience in speech technology, and we'll talk about your background in a moment. But maybe just by way of introduction for everybody watching, I think my audience is a lot of people in the Bittensor network, but also getting people from other ecosystems like Ethereum and Solana. Maybe you could give a brief introduction about yourself, and then, maybe a little bit about your baptism of fire into Bittensor, because I think you were hinting at that, and I've seen some of your other interviews. You've got a nice story there as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I've had a sort of strange parallel career since the late 90s. So I came out of Cambridge having been on a very specialist program around speech and language processing. So this was very unusual at the time. Back in those days, there was a real split between natural language processing, which was like chopping up sentences with computers, and speech recognition and speech synthesis, which was very much about signal processing. Now, interestingly, those things have converged, and we are at a moment in history where a single network can do both, and that is, a huge part of the origin of Babelbit. So, however, when I came out of Cambridge, I found that there weren't really any jobs that paid very well in speech labs. So I ended up doing internet stuff. And I'd had a bit of a background as a kind of commercial programmer in banks and large scale things. And the web was where the action was. And I got into the news industry through some friends and ended up doing massive scale web development. So I was amongst the first few people who really automated the production of web pages, taking web pages from things which were handcrafted HTML to things which were controlled by a content management system where a journalist just did journalism. They just write their stories. They don't need to know about tags and databases and whatever. And they press go, and lo and behold, a website appears. And so I led the development of BBC News Online. And then I got interested more in video, and I led the development of ITV's catch-up service. So that was the commercial equivalent in the UK of the BBC iPlayer. We were the first to have kind of like literal click to play. You go to the website, you missed last night's TV show, and you press play and you play it. You don't have to download anything. You don't need special software. And that was really exciting. But I kept getting drawn back into speech research, and a lot of that was through my connections with other ex-Cambridge people running R&D companies, Autonomy being the biggest one. And so ever since then, I've had parallel careers split between doing massive global scale digital products and being at the cutting edge of two things, of speech and language on the one side and search very much on the other side. That's the sort of origins of my career, and it's pretty much been 50-50 ever since.
Yeah, amazing. So what was the segue into Bittensor? I think you mentioned May of last year was kind of your first introduction to TAO and Bittensor.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give us a quick rundown of the introduction and how Babelbit came about after the first few months of diving deep.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll go back a little bit beyond when I discovered Bittensor, because one of the guys I've worked with on and off for years, who's one of the gurus of low latency digital signal processing, Josh Griefer, he and I had been doing some neural net based stuff, but not LLM stuff, to do speech processing a couple of years before. And he came up with some ideas to reduce the latency by doing prediction, but in his case, like predicting what's coming next in an audio wave. That was at the back of my mind as a way of doing things. Could we predict language? But it was at the back of my mind because I was working for a company doing something totally different. We were developing risk software for people, aid workers in Ukraine or Gaza. And I was using LLMs to take verbal reports and turning them into what is the impact radius of a certain kind of bomb, that kind of thing. But my boss got fired, and he was the one interested in innovation. So I left because the company was shifting away from using AI. And I started thinking, okay, well, my next startup, I'm not going to have a team. I'm just going to build stuff myself, because now I've got LLMs that can build for me. I don't have to hire 10 people. And I built a couple of products. And I started doing something very unlike me. I started sort of blogging about it on LinkedIn. And in May last year, a guy called Nigel Grant, who you may all know from SCORE, got in touch. Now, Nigel had been one of the, well, he'd actually been the biggest, he'd run the biggest reseller of a company that I formed that was sold to Autonomy in the 2000s, doing speech and doing video processing. And he said, oh, you've got to come and join us. And I kind of got my head around what they were doing. They were kind of like annotating football matches, analyzing what's going on in each frame. And I thought, this is exciting stuff. I was still more inclined towards speech and audio, but yeah, I was interested. And literally 2 weeks after I joined, I was at the Proof of Talk conference in Paris, manning their stand, pretending that I knew everything there was to know about Bittensor. And at that stage, I was still thinking, is this a joke? How can it be that you've got a startup that is making money before it has a product? How can it be that there are machine learning geniuses being paid out of emissions and doing work for our company? And I just thought, is it a Ponzi scheme? How does this work? But there I met some people who were really serious people. And I thought, well, these people aren't idiots, you know. And I met Will from Macrocosmos. I met Mog, who's now an investor and a non-exec of my company. And I started to realize this is something really exciting, especially for me, because I had started a whole load of startups, and I'd seen other startups where the dynamic of the company destroys itself because it's trying to spend all its time doing fundraising. And the best person to do fundraising is the evangelical CEO, who should really be spending their time building products. But they go, and I've even met people who have said, the moment you close one fundraising round, you just start your next one. I'm thinking, who builds the product then? You know, this is crazy. And then to see companies who are getting their money from emissions, who are getting expert machine learning people contributing, being compensated by emissions, you can have a startup where the economics are upside down. You get paid while you're doing it. And, you know, this for me, after decades of doing it the wrong way, I thought this is the right way. And also, I've always been a bit of an anarchist. The idea that these people making contributions don't have a boss. I love the fact that the miners don't have a boss. You know, this is just amazing. If I can't set the right incentive for the miner to do work that's useful for my project, that's my fault. It's not their fault. You know? And that is wonderful. You know, so that was what happened last summer. And
so that kind of aligned then with the sentiment you had mentioned, where you had, for the previous few months, you'd been thinking about, okay, the next startup or business I want to build, I want to do it alone. And you're not necessarily doing Babelbit alone, but the incentive model of Bittensor allows you to outsource the, you know, the engineering talent and the people who are creating and updating the model on, I guess, a daily basis. So
I can put this in a really simple way. So one of my, so I've got three other staff members. One is Josh, who I mentioned before. Now, Josh, when I told him about the ambition of what we wanted to do, he said, that's something where you need the resources of OpenAI to do it. And then I showed him what Macrocosmos were doing and other super ambitious things. And I said, within the Bittensor world, we don't need an OpenAI level of 200 staff on every project because we have 200 miners on every project. The hard part is training the models. Josh has got the innovative ideas about what kind of model it is we need to train, but he doesn't have to have armies of people to do that training.
Mhm.
So, for instance, we're not creating a normal LLM in the same way that, say, DeepSeek is. Our LLM is a speech mode LLM. We're tokenizing the audio into chunks of meaning that are still in speech mode, and then creating the output out of speech. So that means that we can lower the latency by not having to transform into text and so forth. And from Josh's point of view, this is something that he would have loved to have done in his last job, but they wouldn't pay for a team of 200 people to do it. And so we're now just getting used to the idea that we have to invent these challenges which will attract great people to train something completely new.
Yeah.
So that's the amazing thing,
So before we dive into the intricacies of the incentive mechanism and the semantic predictive modeling, could you maybe just describe Babelbit for those who are a little bit newer in simple terms, what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve?
I'm just gonna let my cat out of the room.
No problem.
Go on, you.
Yeah, just to kind of simplify the business and the business model.
Yeah, and actually that's another one that's easy to explain. And the way I always explain anything to do with AI is by explaining what human beings do. So what a United Nations interpreter does is not like Google Translate, but faster. They're doing all kinds of things which Google Translate doesn't even try to do. So one of the things that they do is they try to impart in the most culturally sensitive and temporally sensitive way what is just being said. And so they try to keep just behind what's being said. And they do this in several ways. One, they guess what's coming next, because obviously most of the time it's obvious. The next few words are obvious to any native speaker. Secondly, they know that someone that's stumbling across their speech and maybe repeating things and saying things in a wordy way, they didn't intend to do it that way, yet Google Translate would translate that word for word. And if I say, I was just going to say, oh no, what I mean is, they would just ignore all that and say what you actually mean. And so they'd also remove expletives. They also, if somebody doesn't know the polite form of referring to the Prophet Muhammad, an interpreter would know all those things, and they would do that in the right way. And so one thing that we've learned from speaking to interpreters is that the gold standard of interpretation versus translation is that literal accuracy is not the gold standard for an interpreter. Imparting the meaning in the best way for the listener is. Now, you can do that with Google Translate, but how would you do it? You would do it by having a multi-phase process. You'd say, okay, here's the literal translation. Now we'll remove the repetitions. Now we'll remove the swear words. Now we'll add the cultural sensitivity. And then you end up with a 5-second delay, and what the system is talking about was what the speaker was talking about 10 seconds ago. So, but with an LLM, things work differently. So imagine you give a prompt to ChatGPT and you have a paragraph. Let's forget translation for it. Say you have a paragraph of very clumsy colloquial English, and you say to it, having explained what the audience is like and the kind of level of politeness they need and the fact that they're in a hurry and they need it to be short and whatever, say, write the short, polite version of this. It doesn't do that in 5 phases. It knows the meaning of the original language, and it knows how to express that meaning with all of those criteria in a one-shot process. So that's why, for me, everything happened at once. LLMs became powerful at the same moment that I discovered Bittensor and didn't need to have an army of people. And Josh was made redundant the same month that Mika left Tensora, our other founder. But one huge thing missing was that I was a newbie to Bittensor. Josh was a newbie to Bittensor. Mika is an NLP expert. He'd been working on natural language predictive systems, but between that and his current job with us, he was a miner working for Tensora. So he knew how to integrate with the incentive mechanisms and how all of the complex machinations of Bittensor work. So it all fell together at exactly the right moment. All of those things about what our ambition was were things which 5 years ago I would have dreamt of, but thought that's just impossible. All of a sudden, they became possible for all kinds of reasons. The underlying technology was becoming mature with LLMs. The incentive mechanism and the way of funding became possible with this crazy world that is Bittensor. And the final one, which no one could have predicted, is that the three other people that I really needed to do this just appeared out of the woodwork the same week. It was amazing. As well as Josh and Mika, I was introduced to a guy called Tom Horner. Now, Tom had spent the last year being a Bittensor trader. So he knows what stakers want, he knows what miners want, and I know what customers want. So it's just this extraordinary team of 4 people. And there's one last thing, which is, it's not really hugely relevant, but it still amazes me every single day. So when I was working for Score for a few months, one thing was the idea of hiring me was that I would come up with things that were sort of beyond the scope of their immediate roadmap and, be like a bit of a futurologist. But everything I came up with was kind of, I don't know, they actually, to be honest, Tim, their CTO, had enough ideas for their roadmap without having me there anyway. So, but working with them was frustrating for one reason, nothing to do with them as individuals. They're all fantastic. So their data scientist is in Connecticut. Max, the founder, is in Paris. Nigel, my old friend, is in Dubai. Tim is in Brisbane. Try to have a meeting. They're not even, it's not just that they're not in the same country, they're not in the same continent. No two of them are on the same continent. All 4 of us are within an hour of my house. And I didn't hire it that way. It just happened that way. When I was introduced to Mika, he'd been working for a company in Manchester, and he's actually from Nantes in France. Turns out he lives in Surrey. So
the serendipity of it all is,
it's like 5 layers of serendipity of the domain that we're working in, the funding mechanism, the staff we need, and their location all happened at once. And it's amazing. It's beyond belief.
So some of the stuff that you just referenced, like what I was picking up on there was kind of the contextual awareness that the example you gave from the UN translator, needing to have that contextual awareness and almost being able to predict what the person is about to say next, but also then being able to communicate and translate that in a way that is culturally sensitive, contextually aware. How does that then translate, excuse the pun, into what you are incentivizing the miners to actually produce on the subnet? I'm curious if we can kind of drill down into that a little bit.
So that is probably the biggest technological development that we as a team of 4 are making at the moment. So for our first challenge, which was a kind of language prediction challenge, just to show that it's possible to guess what people are about to say, and therefore it's possible to lower latency. That was our first challenge. That one didn't really go far enough because we used very, very standard measures of how of whether 2 things mean the same thing. So in linguistics, in natural language processing, there are all kinds of algorithms which can tell you that this sentence means the same as that sentence. None of those methods can do what we need to do, can tell that a succinct, polite, blasphemy-free, shortened version of something means the same as the long, wordy, rude original. And What is the answer to that? Well, the answer to that is LLMs. So our work as the subnet owners is to come up with an LLM judge, which will then create numeric output to score the different kinds of criteria we're optimizing for the miners. So say we decided that we've got the latency to where we want it, we've got the accuracy where we want it, and we say, okay, now we're going to work on politeness. And then we'd have to create a score that was optimizing for politeness. The chances are we'll do a blended score that makes sure that we do all of them. And one approach we've thought of for that is that we kind of have an adequacy threshold for some of the criteria and then a numeric score for the others. So if it's accurate enough, if it's fast enough, then we'll score on politeness. So that's the usual way of doing hybrid scores. If you do a true hybrid where you're taking a proportion of this and that and the other, the problem with that is you could have a winner that has optimized for something that isn't really that important. So by having a kind of threshold to say, okay, every single contestant that gets through the first round is polite enough, everyone is accurate enough, now we're going for latency. And latency is the biggest one, and we've just come up with a new latency algorithm that's a bit different from everyone else's. And the reason is that what I realized was in the case of an interpreter, the important thing isn't the sort of average of how many seconds behind the speaker they are. The important thing is at the end of a kind of chunk of meaning, at the end of a phrase, that the listener has had the meaning imparted to them as early as possible. The distribution of when each part of that became understood by them isn't that important. It's more that they now know what that phrase is, they can listen to the next phrase. We believe that we can do better than human beings in the long run as we start to train these things. And I can give you a very, very simple reason why. The hardest skill of an interpreter is something computers don't have trouble with at all. As an interpreter, the hardest thing to learn when you're training is that you have to keep speaking while you're listening to the next thing being spoken. Imagine how hard that is.
Yeah.
You're expressing something quite complex in a different language from what you've just heard it in, and you're still listening to what the next thing being spoken is. A friend of mine who's been helping us, he's a trilingual interpreter. He's a English, French, Russian interpreter. So he would be in a meeting with the British Prime Minister, the French Prime Minister, and the Russian diplomat, and he'd be translating three ways. So you can imagine exactly how hard that is. So all of those qualities that I've listed are hard enough, but he's also got to translate and listen at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So the miners are then actually creating in quasi real time the LLM. Is that right?
Yes, they are taking a sort of very basic LLM and making it better and better and better. And my inspiration for this was probably, quite a few subnets inspired me, but the one that got me most was Ridges, because Shaq has been super helpful, really lovely guy, unbelievable. He had no particular obligation to us. I think his very first subnet was a fork of Score, so maybe there was a bit of loyalty that way. But actually, the thing that impressed me was that he set a threshold for what he thought was good enough for a commercial release and found a benchmark that would measure that. So he took the benchmark and said, okay, when the minor submissions are getting to 78% on this benchmark, that'll be as good as Grok, or good enough to compete with Grok or whatever. And his base script, when he launched it, scored 4%. And I thought, this is fantastic. So the great thing for the miners, they're all thinking, well, I think it can beat 4%. So, and then he got to a stage when it was getting to like 55, 56, 57, 58. And you are seeing on the front page of the website, they've changed their mechanism now, but this is when it really inspired me. And the top miners were getting $30,000. I was thinking some geek somewhere in the world has just got $30,000, and that's because he's made a serious contribution to the automatic generation of working code. And So we will put up a model. Maybe it won't be quite as bad as the 4% model, but we'll put up the base script that does the basic job of translating from one language to another in real time, speech to speech. And it might be a type of model that the miners have never seen before. So a lot of them won't have ever worked in a speech mode model. They'll be thinking in terms of speech to text, text to text, text to speech. But we're going tokenize the speech, generate out of tokenized speech. So they, it'll be new to them, and we want to attract the best people. So over the next 2 weeks, you're going to see a lot of activity on our site explaining to the miners. So what Josh has just done is he's come up with 3 strategies to suggest to the miners. So you take our base script, and there are 3 or 4 different things you can do. Here are some examples. You can do something different of your own, but we're pointing them in the right direction about how you could improve what we've done. Just so that if anyone's unfamiliar with the technology, they can still get started, because we want them to get into it. We want to make it easy for them to get started. And hopefully they'll get hooked on the weekly stats, seeing the system perform better and better and better as time goes on. And I love that about Ridges. I used to watch it every day.
Yeah, I think Ridges kind of captured the mind share of the whole ecosystem. A few months ago when it was hitting those benchmarks.
Yeah, exactly.
With some of the updates that you just referenced rolling out here in the next week or two, is there going to be some kind of visual dashboard for Babelbit where people can see those updates, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so our current dashboard, designed by the worst web designer in the world, me, isn't exactly great. So I'll show you what I'll do a quick share. So this is what our current results looks like. And then when you go into a particular challenge, you can see what all the other miners have scored. Very, very simple, but it's not really much fun. We've just hired we're going back to our industry Bible of TAO stats. So we've just hired a really great team of web developers. They've done all the designs now, so we're now plumbing the designs into the new database. It's all changing at once, so it's quite tricky because the new database is obviously dealing with speech rather than text. So the designs are finished. I wonder if I can find one of the graphics for you. Maybe I can.
Like the wireframes you've already kind of mocked up and designed, and now they're going.
Oh yes, it's gone beyond the wireframes now. It's really getting there now. So many so many platforms for messaging in this world. But it's one of the funniest things for me when I got into Bittensor was seeing that everyone used Telegram, and in my last industry, no one used Telegram at all. So let's see if I can get into one of these dashboards. But they're a lot slicker, a lot nicer looking. I'll show you one of them now. Share. Yeah. So this is going to be the new. Is that sharing?
I'm just approving it here now. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So you'll see there's a few things that are very, very different. One is this qualifying wins against arena wins. So one of the things, we really listened to the miners, and previously, again, inspired by Ridges and others, we had a winner takes all approach. Whoever did the best, most accurate predictions won the whole competition. Now we've realized that a lot of creative work was being done by people that didn't win. So maybe they didn't get the high score, but they innovated in some other way. So now we're doing a 2-round. The numbers haven't quite been finalized yet, but the first round is shared linearly against the score. So everyone who gets a score, unless they've been found to be cheating or something like that, gets a proportion of the first round emissions with in proportion to how high their score was. The winners, the ones that qualify, which means getting past a certain threshold, in other words, they've improved the system by a certain proportion, they go into the arena and then that is a winner takes all. So once people have gone into the arena, then the winner of the arena takes the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
so they'll get some element of reward for getting into the arena, and then
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you get, so the idea is that anyone that's working hard will get something. People that succeed will get extra.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So I was checking out your website as well. You've got a bit of a roadmap outlined on the website for, I guess, the different phases that you plan to go through with regards to, phrase completion, real-time text translation.
Yeah, that's being thrown away with the new website as well. So
Okay.
we're a bit too far ahead. So things happened a lot faster than we expected. So we will be releasing our first speech-to-speech language model concurrently with the new competition. I don't think it will be of commercial quality just yet, but it will work in the same way as the eventual product, which means that we have already started talking to the resellers that will be using that to integrate into their speech systems.
Yeah.
So that is, in my long experience of selling speech technology, by far the most successful approach I've found over the years, and I learned from the best at Autonomy and others, that the resellers that I'm talking about are the kinds of systems integrators and large consultancies that bid for every large corporate and government project out there. So say, for instance, the European Union were commissioning a new union-wide 33 language comms system, and that included a mixture of translation software, interpreters, etc. Then someone bidding for that, one of our resellers bidding for that project, they would want to have an edge. And if we can convince them that our technology will give them an edge in the bid, then they'll include us in the bid. But the cool thing about resellers is that you'll get one reseller that specializes in big public sector government projects, another one that specializes in oil and gas industry, another one that works in the legal industry, another one that works exclusively in India or China. And that means that as a startup, we don't have to have a picture of the global market where interpretation services are needed, because sellers have that for us, and they can give us their market research, so we don't have the cost of the market research, and they can say, well, what you really need is these languages, you need to deliver them in this kind of context. And that's worked for me very well in the past. So when I was doing speech recognition software and audiovisual search software, like searching through archives of recorded phone calls and stuff, I got into places that I could never have approached as a small company. So we were a 10-man company, but we had the sales team of Autonomy and their resellers. One of their resellers was CGI, who at the time were called Logica. And they were the main sellers of that kind of technology into the British security services. So we found out that that MI5 had pretty good speech recognition, but they were no good at switching between languages, which happens a lot. So people would speak Urdu, then they'd speak English, and their version of English was a special version of English called London Asian slang, and they would have to switch between those things. Now, they had the models trained for each one, but we developed the technology that allowed them to switch in real time between them. And so we would have never known about that opportunity had it not been for the reseller. How could we possibly know? So that's why I like, as a market entry, resellers are great. Now, once you have, a few dozen sales through resellers, you start to see the commonalities. You start to say, okay, this is what most people want. And then you can go into the something that's quite an expensive thing to get wrong, the productization part. What is the right kind of API to make this something you could sell to a company and they could run with it for themselves? What's the right kind of product to put on Amazon Web Services Marketplace as a self-serve API, that kind of thing. But without doing that initial phase through the resellers, it's very, very hard to do that level of market research as a four-man company. Although it's getting easier with ChatGPT, that does a lot of work for me.
So is that kind of a phased approach you're thinking about with the go-to-market? Like the reseller model will be the kind of first way to get market exposure, and then maybe down the line there is some kind of consumer-facing application that could be built out.
Yeah, I think so. My prediction is that unless an opportunity emerged from within our own market research and R&D that no one else was doing, is probably that would still come through indirect sales. So say, I mean, for instance, there are plenty of translation apps. None of them do the human interpreter that we do. Now, if one of those who already has a market, who already has 100 million customers, said, we will give you 5% of the retail price of our app if you let us integrate your technology, that for us would be a much better deal than trying to muscle a new brand into the market as a company that no one's heard of in the app world, to say this is the best app in the world. If there's already a best app in the world that we can make better, so there are basically 4 routes to market. 2 of them are indirect. One is the value-added reseller, the people doing the big projects. The other is the OEM, the people that bundle our SDK into their own app. And then there are the direct ones. The direct ones tend to be a bit of productization, like can we create a great plugin for Google Meet, or can we that we go straight to the consumer with. My guess is that the indirect sales are the way to get the fastest multiplier as a small company. As you grow, or if we had a partnership like I did with Autonomy. So before Autonomy acquired my company, I had access to their global sales team. Then you can start to say, okay, we can afford to do some productization here, because the sales team can come back to us and say what the product needs to be like, and they can come also back to us with the sales targets. And working with partners, it's incredible to work with a partner where you can sit down as a 5-man company with a global sales team and say, how much are you going to sell of our product next year? And even if you take the most conservative, salesmen always exaggerate a bit, but for us as a tiny company to be able to have sales forecasts created by an established global team, that to me is I mean, I've been around the block a few times, and that's one of the huge advantages we have in Babelbit, that this is a startup but with proper corporate sales experience. I mean, even my own company, I had a small global team, but I still had an East Coast guy, a West Coast guy, a UK guy, an EU guy, and then Nigel from Score was outsourced all the EMEA stuff. And I think Nigel got us all of our Indian sales.
So speaking of structural advantages, I think I heard you say in a different interview that, I guess I'm wondering, why does Babelbit stand to win in this niche? And I think you said that, I think it was Cambridge maybe had a paper, and they were stating that they simply didn't have the funding to kind of keep running the translation tool.
It really surprised me. So I had the idea, as I said, to use prediction. So this is going back a year and a half ago, and then I was busy with my day job, not thinking about research at that time. And then when I came back to it after my boss was fired, I was thinking, what can I do with AI? I started doing some desk research, and I found one paper that was describing something close. It wasn't quite as aggressive on the prediction. It certainly didn't have the concept of a machine interpreter, but it did use an LLM in a similar kind of way. And that was by Phil Woodland's team at Cambridge. Phil taught me a million years ago. And it was really interesting that in their paper, they said that they chose to do it with an off-the-shelf open source text LLM. They would have much rather do it the way we did it, but they didn't have the funding to do it that way. So they would have much rather have built from scratch a speech mode LLM that tokenized the speech directly. And if I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't know if there are any subnets that have good partnerships with university R&D companies, but you can imagine a small R&D company, a small R&D team within a university department, then having 200 machine learning experts, training up the model that they can't afford to train. Incredible, and I think that Bittensor is just scraping the surface, but it made me feel good in two ways. One, if someone as clever as Phil and his team of geniuses was doing something along these lines, I can't be too far wrong. It's good. I'm not, I haven't lost it. I'm still thinking along the right lines. But so that was good. It was good that they weren't carrying on with that project, because it meant it left it open for me to do. But it depressed me as well to think that, Cambridge have been the world leaders at speech tech since the 90s. My friend Tony Robinson, that I've mentioned in a few of these podcasts, who runs Speechmatics, incredible guy. He was the first person really to use neural nets to process speech in 1987. Incredible guy. And he was doing that, and through the 90s, he was the first person to create a neural net-based speech recognition system that competed with the previous generation of technologies. Everyone said you couldn't do it with neural nets. He did it. And that was the tests done by the American military. So that's a serious test. It's just depressing to think that Cambridge can't afford to throw money at things. You'd think that they'd be able to. And they rely, I guess, on corporate sponsorship.
So maybe could you touch on, I guess the cost efficiencies that Bittensor affords a subnet like Babelbit to do something like this mean that you don't have to, have huge amounts of funding to achieve some of the things that you're setting out to achieve.
Yeah. Training novel types of model. Has something gone wrong? Oh, you disappeared for a moment. Hello?
Yep, I think we're back. Can you hear me?
Are you back? Yeah, you disappeared. So yeah. So what was I saying? So the main thing is think a perfect example is DeepSeek. So everyone said, how did DeepSeek do things so quickly? How did they do it so cheaply? They did it because they built on someone else's model.
Yeah.
We don't have that luxury because we're building a different type of model. So how would DeepSeek do it if they were doing what we did? They would have to get investment and hire 300 people to do that, to work in teams training the model. Training huge models is a very, very big job, but it's a very different kind of job if you have miners doing it. And miners have this weird competitive collaborative thing. They need each other, but they want to beat each other. And if you look at some of the work that's coming out of the community, one of the most exciting things that Macrocosmos are working on is a mechanism for fragmenting the training of a single model. So usually models have to be trained as a monolithic thing, that each training cycle trains the same model to get a bit better and a bit better. They've developed an architecture which allows different people to take different chunks of the model and then coalesce them again as a single model once those bits of training are done, which is just perfect for the Bittensor community, because it allows each miner to be doing an affordable chunk. So it's interesting that the Bittensor community, because of the way it's structured, is even coming up with novel mechanisms for how you do the basic job of AI, which is training models. And I can't even pretend that I understand it. Steph talks me through it, but I keep saying to people that I'm not a mathematician, and
yeah. So you touched on it a little bit already, Matthew, but the ideal customer or the ideal end user, you talked about resellers tapping into, maybe tenders that are being put out by the European Union or other large corporations. Are you thinking that those are the ideal customers? And when do you think Babelbit will have its first customers, once the model reaches a point where you think it is ready and product ready?
I'm hoping that it will have its first paying customers next quarter, because I think that if we find the right resellers, that they will sponsor us to build a model that's specific to a project that they have, and that way we'll be able to focus in a slightly different way. But I think the real market is this. At the moment, the market for interpreters is a tiny market because people can't afford interpreters. The market for people using machine translation software instead of an interpreter is small because it does a crap job. Everyone's been through that. Talk into Google Translate, you wait for it to speak to the person that's listening, they listen, they probably listen to it 2 or 3 times to understand it, then they speak back, you then wait for the translation. That's not a good experience. So once there is a machine experience that is as good as having your own private interpreter, then every meeting will change. I think it can change the economy of all collaboration. Everyone has had good and bad experience of outsourcing. When I outsourced to India, to Pakistan, to Egypt recently, the one thing I insist upon is that I interview every single engineer that I'm going to work with, because as far as I'm concerned, the slightest shortfall in the ability to speak fluent English is going to slow the team down, cost all kinds of errors, etc. They might be the best engineer in the world, but if they can't keep up with a conversation in English, then they can't work for me. And you imagine if that is taken away, and I can say out of the whole world, out of the 100 million great programmers in China, out of the in Cambodia, in Russia, in Vietnam, in Brazil, if anyone can join any team, then there are these different limits on collaboration. Some of them we've solved. So one of the ones we've solved through things like GitHub is working asynchronously. We don't have to be in the same time zone if we have good handovers and work that way. I prefer to have meetings and work in real time, but some people don't. And GitHub themselves are an asynchronous model. Others are, we don't have to work in the same office anymore. So I think since the pandemic proved to us that we don't all need to work in the same room, that one's gone. The one that hasn't gone is language, and pretty much for open source projects, everyone has to learn English. For text, for asynchronous work, they can probably do it using machine translation, but having a meeting, having a discussion, having a whiteboard session, very, very difficult. So I think that's it'll be everyone is the customer.
Yeah. So a couple other quick questions, and I want to be respectful of your time as well, Matthew. I've seen a few of these different real-time translation apps. I've actually gotten advertisements, I think, on like Instagram and TikTok, where you put in the earphone and it's listening and it's translating for you. I have never tested them. What is the level of coherence with those apps versus what you're building, and have you explored the differences or the limitations maybe of those existing apps?
Yeah, I guess that there are 3 main sort of shortfalls. One is that they are just slower because they don't take advantage of the predictive power of an LLM. So, there's the famous story about someone listening to a German speech and waiting for the verb. They can't translate the sentence, so they've heard the last word because that's the whole meaning of the sentence. So that's one thing that we are aggressively going towards. The other is that what I started with, what the gold standard of a good interpreter is not the perfect translation. It's actually the most contextually relevant translation that imparts the meaning in the best, quickest way for the listener. And that not many projects are even looking at that. They don't even think that. Most people think that the perfect machine interpreter is Google Translate, but faster. That's just the case. That doesn't make a good interpreter. And then the final part is the integration into an ordinary conversation that has all of that kind of cultural specificity. And we want to take that a step further. So this is something that I haven't mentioned yet. So say we sell to, I don't know, a huge international law firm. There's something interesting about legal experts. They don't speak English. They speak their weird legal version of English. So we feel that if our customers can be provided with a secure way of sharing all of their historical comms, which is accumulating all the time, that our predictive powers, our ability to speak in the right way for the listener, will get better and better and better for that context. And it could be a group of friends that have their own slang. It could be that, you know, MI5 no longer need to build a special London Asian slang model because it just comes out of the usage. And that, I think, will be enormous. That the oil and gas industry have their own vocabulary, the aeronautics industry have their own. Young people speak differently from old people. And I think that the trend has been the other way. Try and build a single model that does everything. I think when it comes to prediction, that's the wrong approach. So that I think, and that also gives us all kinds of interesting things we can do on chain with Bittensor as well.
Yeah.
So if you imagine that you know, that every customer is also training a model. So there are miners working on customer specific models all the time.
Yeah. Awesome. We've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything else we didn't get to touch on about Babelbit specifically? Anything on the roadmap that you want to hint about over the next few months? Anything else at all you want to mention about Babelbit specifically?
About us specifically, I think we've covered everything. I think that yeah, I mean, if anyone, one of the things I learned early is that there are two kinds of subnets. So the ones that are happy to be doxed and the ones that are secretive. If anyone wants to know anything after this, just get in touch. We're an open book. We love to talk to people, and we actually have a policy. I mean, Tom is our friendliest guy. Whenever he hears about an interesting new subnet, he actually reaches out to them and say, "Hey, we're Babelbit. What are you doing?" And so that's what I would say. You know, if I've missed anything out, if there's something you want to know, just get in touch.
No, that's great. Maybe just a final word on TAO and subnets in general, then, Matthew, because we were discussing this before we went live, and you were kind of talking about obviously the larger correlation between what Bitcoin does with its price and Bittensor, but then subnets are kind of bucking that trend. Yeah, what are you seeing there, and what excites you about that?
This is my absolute pet peeve at the moment. So I have friends who are Bitcoin people. A friend of mine runs a company called Fedi. He's a huge Bitcoin guy, Bitcoin hodler. And I know other people who are into Ethereum, other people that are investing in Solana, Sui, and other things. And they're all talking about their winter. And I wrote this article last week called Winter What Winter. You can see it on X, on our X channel. And what I wanted to point out was this, that when you see something on YouTube that says TAO explained, they explain it as though it's just another altcoin. TAO isn't a cryptocurrency at all, really. What TAO is an investment ecosystem that once you've bought your TAO, it then gets you into a world where you can create a portfolio of startups. Now, startups used to be a really odd kind of investment because you invest in a startup, you wait 10 years, you may or may not make some money. Whereas the stock market is boring. The amounts you make are a few percent here and there. It's not like the huge multiples of startups, but at least you can withdraw your stake in one and put it in another. Bittensor gives you both. It gives you startups that you can play with like a stock market. Now, when I was looking at the so-called winter, I saw that you know, Bitcoin had gone down by 50% or whatever it went down by, a huge amount. TAO went down by 60%, but the dollar price of our alpha was still going up, not the price in TAO. So we went from 0.0019 TAO to 0.0045 and 0.006, but the dollar price today of our TAO is, I'll look at it right now, is $1.51. in October, before the winter, it was 95 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So Bittensor as an investment category, as buying some TAO is a bit like signing up with a stockbroker. You sign up with a stockbroker, and then you can trade stocks and shares. You buy some TAO, and you can stake and unstake subnets. And if we could get that message across the world, this is a different category of investment. You can day trade your subnets. You can, the more TAO you have, the more fun you can have doing that. But we have had no winter. We have gone up 50%, while others have gone down 50%. Now, that to me is a message that should be in the Financial Times. And you know what? If we could divorce ourselves from the general crypto world, so if people didn't consider TAO like Bitcoin, then it wouldn't slump every time Bitcoin slumped, which means we'd get a double effect. As well as having your healthy portfolio, which is going up because you've chosen the right subnets, you also wouldn't have this slavish following that when Bitcoin goes down, all the other crypto goes down, because it would no longer be considered part of that universe.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is just, it's possibly the most remarkable thing about Bittensor, all from a financial point of view.
Yeah.
From my point of view, it's all about building products, but
yeah. And I think, I've been following this for the past couple of years, but I think it's a bit of an information asymmetry, because when you first come across Bittensor, most people, including myself, put it into that category of just, another crypto token. And it does take a little bit of peeling back the curtain, diving deeper, and it takes a few months to truly get to grips with what a subnet even is. And then you start to really peel back and understand what all of these AI startups are effectively doing under the hood.
Exactly. I mean, the first thing I noticed was it doesn't suffer from the two main criticisms of Bitcoin. So, when anti-Bitcoin people say it's based on nothing, there's no underlying value, and they say it wastes a huge amount of energy solving pointless puzzles. Now, with Bittensor, you're not investing in nothing, you're investing in AI startups. And two, the mining is doing useful work in the world, creating new AI models. Mm-hmm. So it's not susceptible to those criticisms, but it's also not susceptible to the financial criticism that it can suddenly go into a slump. It'll only go into a slump if the AI companies are failing, Mm-hmm. And that to me is, to give credit where credit's due, I'm not the only, but Siam has written a lot about this as well. Other people have. Mm-hmm. I try to write in the simplest terms because I'm not really a finance guy. So if you go to our X channel, there's a I didn't write the headline "Why Babelbit boomed while Bitcoin crashed." That was someone else, but I wrote the winter headlines.
Okay.
But because I thought it affected the whole of Bittensor, not just Babelbit. So,
absolutely. Final thing here. There's one quick question in the chat, Matthew. Someone's asking if Subnet 102 Vocine is a competitor that potentially threatens Babelbit. I haven't looked at Subnet 102 in great detail, so I don't know. I'm not sure if you've looked at this.
I don't think so. We've looked at it obviously, and it's one that we intend to reach out to and make friends with. I think that I don't think they're doing translation. Mm-hmm. They're doing something very similar to what Josh and I did in the last company we worked together 5-6 years ago. A lot about sort of real-time voice morphing and all kinds of other things. Mm-hmm. Recognition. I've done a huge amount of work with Tony from Semantic and others. If they suddenly got into translation, then they would be a competitor. Mm-hmm. I used to have this little list I used to give people. I can't remember where I first got it from. It was some kind of, one of those websites that talked about startups. This is going back 20 years. And it said 6 reasons why your startup will fail. And it had all of these reasons. And it said, after the 6, it said, notice, none of these reasons are because you have a competitor. I've been in so many board meetings where someone says, oh, there's a new competitor doing what we do. We're going to die. Mm-hmm. Apple has competitors, and it's the biggest company in the world. The fact is that having competitors is not going to kill your company. Just carry on doing a good job.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the Bittensor mantra as well. Let us compete. Miners compete against each other. Subnets compete against each other.
Absolutely. And I found that that even subnets in the same area like talking to each other. when we were talking about getting out, outsourcing our compute, you know, we talked to Shoots and we talked to Targon. There was no hostility between them. They have different products, and we worked out which was most suitable for us. You know?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Matthew, once again, thank you for taking the time to join us. People can check out at Babelbit on X to keep on top of all the updates. I'm sure as you're rolling out things over the next week or so, they can follow along. I'm sure you guys will be communicating those updates.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed the conversation, and
likewise.
yeah, would love to get you back in a few months once there's some bigger updates.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to come back, and you know, one of the things where we will have literally in the next couple of weeks, we'll be starting to show people live translation. That's obviously a lot more fun to show than just me talking. So yeah, it'll be good.
Exciting times. Yeah.
Me talking.
Thank you for your time, Matthew.